In the last video, we covered the process of Daiichi Genga, or first key in layout in Japanese animation. In this video, we'll be discussing the process of checks that take place after the first key step is completed. This series of checks is intended to ensure content and quality consistency between cuts, whether or not characters are on model, and to help train newer animators. There are three types of people primarily that will check first key in layout: the Inshitsu, the Kantoku, and the Sakhan. The Inshitsu is the episode director, the person who either drew the storyboard or has reviewed the boards in their entirety with the series director and has a good grasp on the big picture of the animation, as well as authority on decisions to alter the camera work, composition, and make changes that aid continuity between cuts. The Kantoku, or series director, sometimes checks a portion of the more important cuts after the Inshitsu when layouts or cuts are straying from the overall intent of the series. The Sakhan, or animation director, is the individual responsible for making sure that the art is consistent for the characters and that the animation quality is consistent as well. They will be referencing character model sheets, or kyarakta sette as they are referred to in Japan, to make sure that everything is conforming to the designs of the character designer, as well as making sure that the motions of the characters are animated well. Sakhan staff include a standard Sakhan, mecha Sakhan, action Sakhan, effects Sakhan, and general Sakhan, who draws on top of the standard Sakhan to further correct the characters. In Japanese animation, animated cuts are kept in folders, which include all of the drawings from the animators and the corrections made by the directors. The current digital process mimics this very closely. When the Genga animators finish and submit their animations, the directors will do various checks and add their drawings to the cut folder either physically or digitally, and give it back to the animator for them to clean up and implement corrections to their original animations. For the rest of this video, we'll be going over checks that we did on our previous animations. I will be continuing my role as Inshitsu, and Will be filling the role of Sakhan. Cut 1 Inshitsu check. As the Inshitsu, my job at this stage is to check the results of the Daiichi Genga stage and compare it against the Akonte which I created to make sure that the intent that was presented in the storyboard was properly translated into the rough layout and animation. Note that I will be drawing my corrections on top of a pink layer, which emulates the paper process that is standard in the industry. Animation checking uses colored paper to more easily let the animators know who the corrections came from. Looking at the Akonte for cut 1 compared to the final result, it looks like a pretty direct translation of the intent, but I think that the reality of the cut doesn't quite accomplish what I was hoping for. So I decided I would need to make some changes to the framing. Having the final frame stop closer to the alarm clock and Emily, I think will feature the character better than showing the entirety of her bed. I notated the frame change by redrawing the first and last frame positions and the TU pan notation. My second job as Inshitsu is to look for inconsistencies across the entirety of the animation, such as making sure layout details are all properly in place. Looking at cut 7, Will included a wall in the window outside which is not present in this first cut, so I notated that this should be included in the redo of the layout. I noticed that Emily is way too small considering where she ends up getting off the bed in cut 2. I redrew a rough sizing guide to tell the animator to increase the size of the character. My third job as Inshitsu is to look at camera work, compositing effects, and lens considerations. I think the animator intended to use a warped perspective to assist in emulating the truck up, but I don't think it was implemented properly, so I notated that they should fix the perspective of the bookshelf. I notated this with pasu totonoete kudasai, which just means fix the perspective, please. Since the Sakhan will be getting the cut before the animator gets it back, it's likely the Sakhan will make the correction. Most of the time though, Inshitsu will fix these parts with drawings and the background goes straight to the background painting staff, but depending on the production, the Inshitsu will occasionally pass off the background corrections to an animation director. Cut 1 Timesheet corrections. As the Inshitsu, I also need to make corrections to the timesheet if I feel like something is incorrect or needs to be improved. It's most common for the Inshitsu to write corrections in the doga column. The second key artist will later erase their original timing and rewrite it in the key column, and then erase the doga column so that it's empty for the doga artist. There isn't really any reason Emily can't be breathing during the panning sequence, so I rewrote the timing to loop for the whole cut, showing where the in-between should be placed with tick marks. I wanted it to be animated on 3s and for the animation to be reused. I notated a use of gyakushito, which instructs the reuse of frames but in reverse. I notated this incorrectly though, and luckily Will, the Sakhan, knew what I was trying to do and did the correct notation in the Sakhan checks. Normally it would be very uncommon for an Inshitsu to do incorrect timesheet corrections. Cut to Inshitsu check. Looking at the storyboard, the intent of the scene did translate properly, but the execution had a lot of problems. The way it was animated made it seem like her bed is really far off the floor when it's not, so I went over the animation with a crude animation to show the animator what might be a good fix for this. The animation director would then redraw the character on model and with fixed proportions. Note how the drawings are labeled with the number and letter circled. This is an indication of the drawing being Genga. When the cut moves into the doga or in-betweening phase, the layers will be labeled with just the number circled. I also thought that the scene wouldn't work with the current layer setup, so I rebuilt the way the scene is constructed. I notated to gosei or partial hold the ground shadows, which means the entirety of the ground shadow will be a cell with transparency, and the only moving parts of Emily's shadow will be copied and pasted onto the static parts. I did a rough animation to indicate which parts of the cell will remain still and which parts will need to be gosei'd. I made the ground shadow be the A cell, and Emily and the blanket into the B cell. I also thought that the cut was very robotic and lacking in character, so I made a notation that keys A14 through 20, Emily should have a toe wiggle and feet settling. Normally this motion would be drawn by the Inshitsu, but since I'm inexperienced, I left it to the animation director. Cut to timesheet corrections. Since I drew guides for the revised animation, I needed to include the new keyframes and in-betweens into the timesheet. Cut 3 Inshitsu check. For cut 3, I compared the storyboard to the Daiichi Genga and realized that the framing wasn't correct. I really wanted some of her torso to be visible in frame, and the animator framed it much more zoomed in than intended. So I had to shrink the Genga and notate Furemu kochirade to tell the animator to redraw it zoomed out a bit. Cut 4 Inshitsu check. Cut 4 really needed a lot of work. It was potentially too simple when looking at it compared to the other cuts, so I restructured this one almost entirely. I made the sink and toilet into a book and the shower curtain into a book, which, if you watched previous videos in this series, you will know that books are background elements on transparencies that are placed in between cells. With these items as books, this would allow us to make the steam effect slide underneath to give the effect of moving steam. In regards to the steam effect, I added in the positions for the steam composite FX to slide, using red and green to show the starting and ending position of the slide. I've also notated that Emily's silhouette and the water in the shower should be a cell. Cut 5 Inshitsu check. On cut 5, I really felt that it met the intent of the storyboard, so the only change I had on cut 5 was layout inconsistency. It was missing polka dots on the pillow and tissue box, as well as one of the stuffed animals. Aside from that, I had no other corrections. Cut 6 Inshitsu check. Cut 6 met the intent of the storyboard, but it felt stiff compared to the other cuts in the animation. This could be due to a lack of direction on my part in the initial ikonte. I wanted to add in some more animation to this cut to make it more consistent with the rest of the Genga. In the beginning here, I've added frames A0, 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3 to make the cut show that she had just put her hat on, and cell A5 to create follow-through after she finishes her pose. Cut 6 Timesheet corrections. On the timesheet, I added in the new keys that I drew, and changed the timing a bit to make the motions a bit snappier. Cut 7 Inshitsu check. This cut met the intent of the storyboard, but I thought that the camera motion was a bit too wild compared to the camera work of previous cuts. I wrote in a correction to the camera path by drawing in the camera positions for each frame and drawing a timing chart to accompany it. This type of pan is called a memori pan, so I labeled it as such. I also notated here that the dots were missing here in the layout. Now that the Inshitsu has reviewed all the cuts, the cut folders will be sent to the Sakhan for checks on the character models, art, and animation quality.
Layout Sakhan check. Cut 1. Drawing corrections. For this cut, the storyboard intent was most likely to show her room, prominently her animation desk, and then Emily sleeping before her alarm clock goes off. So I structured composition of the cut to show both of these better, by placing the vanishing point behind the desk and extrapolating from there. I also tried to make the cut end with both Emily and the alarm clock visible and close to located in thirds of the screen to make the composition easier to read. I could have drawn with curved perspective or intentionally made the vanishing points harder to decipher, but I wanted these indoor shots to look like they were shot on a wide-angle lens, so that more of the interior would be visible while not having to place the camera outside of the room. The other issue with the cut was that the desk and chair slide in it to simulate 3D motion, but the ground plane that the chair is on is in frame. This means that the chair will look like it's physically sliding across the floor in the final, so I reframed the cut to not show the bottom of the chair. Also, in the original layout, the camera was moving to the left and up while zooming in, but the slide of the desk and chair books was moving to the right only. For multiplane motion to look right, the foreground elements have to move in the opposite direction of the camera, including zooms and diagonal motion, so I adjusted the slide notations as well. Timesheet corrections. The repeat on this timesheet was inconsistent with how many frames were used to breathe in and out. The inconsistency was unintentional, so I fixed the sheet to be a standard repeat with the same number of frames breathing in as breathing out. Cut 2. Drawing corrections. For this cut, I did my best to reconstruct the cut to fix minor perspective and proportion issues, as well as adjust the motion. I focused on trying to create overlapping action for the cloth, and keeping the knees together on the character to make the motion more feminine. I also adjusted the key to in-between ratio so that the cut wasn't either too static or over-energetic looking. I aimed for an average of about 1 key for every 2 to 4 in-betweens. Timesheet corrections. The layout sheet had too many in-betweens, but the Inshitsu sheet had too many keys that didn't have drawings to go along with them. So I tried to find a happy medium while following the intention of the Inshitsu corrections as much as possible. I also added a kage para for a gradation over the whole shot. Kage means shadow, and para is short for paraffin, which is what transparencies for cells were printed on. Basically, a kage para is a transparent gradation overlay. A kage para is specified by shading the parts of the layout that you want it applied to, and the compositing staff will make a gradation overlay for either the cell, background, or the overall cut that you specified it for. Cut 3. Drawing corrections. For Cut 3, I looked over my original layout and saw that it was both off-model and out of balance with symmetry issues. I focused my corrections on fixing the draftsmanship. Since there isn't a large range of motion, I only needed to correct one of the 2 keys. The second key in the breakdowns will be adjusted to the corrections in the second key stage. Timesheet corrections. I debated actually slowing down the timing for this cut, since it's in the first half of the opening, and I wanted the shots to slowly build in how energetic they were. But since there were no Inshitsu corrections, I ended up copying out and keeping the timing the same. Cut 4. Drawing corrections. For this cut, the perspective lines didn't converge to the eye level properly, and the overall proportions needed adjusting, so I ended up redrawing the background and the character. I lowered the eye level and redrew the perspective with a wide-angle lens feel, since a bathroom shot like this would be hard to fit much of the room on screen if shot with a normal lens. Another thing I changed was that generally, shower curtains are meant to be used on the inside of a tub in order to redirect the water flow to the inside, so I moved the book for the shower curtain to be on top of the silhouette but under the tub. Since the shower curtain itself is its own independent book, we can lower the opacity on it a bit in composite, and let the silhouette show through just a little bit in the final. I also tried to rework the book composition overall, so we can get more depth out of the steam effect that we'll be adding later as well. Cut 5. Drawing corrections. For this cut, I focused on correcting the face, and left most of the rest of the cut as it is. This will make a bit more work for me in the second key phase, but it's a good way to balance your time if the person doing second key has Sakhan experience, is a Sakhan on the episode, or in my case, is the character designer. Cut 6. Drawing corrections. The Inshitsu checks for this cut had 4 keys that were all along the same vector of motion, and without in-betweens. It's both more efficient and accurate to use either in-betweens for the hat rotation motion that's all along one vector, or make the motion into something with more complex overlapping action. I ended up trying to restructure the timing to have more overlapping action. I used a partial key here for when she flicks her hand off of the brim of her hat. For the fist pump at the end, the Inshitsu requested follow-through, so I added 2 keys after the hands move downward, one where they bounce up, and one where they settle a bit more. Timesheet corrections. I extended the follow-through motion to take up a bit more of the cut, so it didn't end up on too long of a hold. I also adjusted the pan and slide notations so that the character would be centered better towards the end of the shot. Cut 7. Drawing corrections. A lot of the drawings in this cut were subpar or off-model, so I focused on trying to get the face as on-model as possible. There's quite a bit of work to be done in the second key phase for this cut as well, but nothing that exceeds the norm. And that's it for Layout Sakhan check. Also, I really wanted to put in a quick apology to everyone following and supporting the channel. I've been really busy and ended up being the main reason for why this video was held up for so long. Fortunately, the rest of the steps are either second key cleanup work that can be done in bite-sized pieces daily, or doga that we're debating on at least partially sourcing to other staff. We really appreciate your support and hope to be powering through the final steps of the process as quickly as possible.
This concludes our video on Inshitsu and Sakhan checks. Be sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for future videos. The next video in the series will be covering the process of second key or Daini Genga, which is the process where the animators implement the changes from the correction stage. We also have an affiliated website called sakugafoundry.com. If you haven't heard of it yet, you should go check it out. Also, a huge thanks to our Patreon supporters who make this content possible.